The story opens in the middle of World War II, as German planes roar across the sky and bombs rain down on London. Amid the chaos, we are introduced to four siblings. Lucy, the youngest, followed by Edmund, Susan, and the eldest, Peter. Edmund stands by the window, watching the aircraft overhead until their mother sharply pulls him away and orders the children to take cover. Susan rushes to grab Lucy, who is still trembling in her bed, frozen with fear. As they hurry toward the shelter, Edmund suddenly dashes back into the house, prompting Peter to chase after him. Inside, Edmund grabs a framed photograph of their father, who is away fighting in the war. The two boys make it back just in time. Once inside the shelter, Peter angrily scolds Edmund for risking their safety, demanding to know why he can never simply follow instructions. Edmund says nothing, gripping the photo tightly, while their mother gathers them all into a protective embrace. Some time later, the children are shown at a crowded train station, preparing to be evacuated along with many other youngsters. Edmund grumbles that if their father were home, he wouldn't force them to leave. Peter snaps back, saying that if their father were there, the war wouldn't even exist. Their mother tells Edmund to listen to his brother, and Peter promises her that he'll take care of the others. After a series of emotional hugs, the children board the train, each wearing an identification tag pinned to their coats. As the train pulls away, they wave goodbye to their parents, holding back tears. When the train finally stops in the countryside, the children are greeted by a stern-looking woman arriving in a horse-drawn carriage. She introduces herself as Mrs. Macready and explains that she will be responsible for them until the war ends. Carrying very little luggage, the children climb aboard and are taken to her large, echoing house. Once inside, Macready bluntly tells them that she's not accustomed to children and firmly lays out the house rules. That night, as the children settle into their unfamiliar surroundings, Lucy complains about the uncomfortable bed. Peter and Susan try to reassure her, talking about the huge grounds and how exciting it will be to explore the next day. Unfortunately, the following day brings heavy rain, forcing them to remain indoors. Susan and Edmund occupy themselves with books, while Lucy suggests playing hide-and-seek. The others agree, scattering throughout the house as Peter begins counting. While looking for a hiding spot, Lucy wanders into a quiet room containing only a large wardrobe draped with a sheet. Curious, she pulls it aside and steps inside. At first, she feels thick coats brushing against her, but as she continues walking backward, the coats give way to snow-covered branches. Turning around, Lucy finds herself standing in a snowy forest, stunned by the beauty of this strange new place. She soon comes across a lone lamppost glowing softly in the middle of the clearing. As she touches it, she hears rustling nearby. A fawn named Mr. Tumnus appears, and both of them hesitate nervously before Lucy retrieves the parcels he's dropped. Seeing his hooves, Lucy realizes he isn't human, and the two introduce themselves. Mr. Tumnus explains that she is in a land called Narnia, which Lucy jokingly remarks is quite a place to fit inside a wardrobe. He invites her back to his home for tea, and she accepts. Inside his warm and cozy cave, they talk about their families and discover that both their fathers are away because of the war. When Lucy mentions Christmas, Mr. Tumnus sadly explains that Narnia hasn't celebrated it in a century. He tells her that the land is trapped in endless winter, without joy or holidays. As he plays music for her, Lucy drifts off to sleep. When she wakes, the mood has shifted. Tumnus tearfully confesses that he betrayed her by informing the White Witch of her arrival and that she plans to capture Lucy. Overcome with guilt, he helps Lucy escape and sends her back the way she came. Lucy bursts out of the wardrobe back in the house, calling out that she's returned safely. To her surprise, no time seems to have passed at all. Peter soon finds her, having just finished counting. Lucy excitedly explains everything, insisting she was gone for hours and showing him the wardrobe, but now it looks perfectly ordinary. Susan and Peter refuse to believe her story, which leaves Lucy heartbroken. Edmund claims he believes her, but Peter accuses him of stirring up trouble. The argument leaves everyone upset, and Lucy shuts the wardrobe door, unable to sleep that night. Later on, Lucy returns to the wardrobe once more. This time, Edmund secretly follows her. Lucy steps back into the snowy world of Narnia, unaware that Edmund soon enters after her as well. Edmund soon stumbles upon the snowy forest and the glowing lamppost, realizing he has entered the same strange world Lucy described. The cold quickly sets in, and as he wanders through the woods calling for his sister, he instead encounters the White Witch. Calm and charming on the surface, she uses her magic to conjure a box of Turkish delight, tempting Edmund with the sweet treat. She questions him about his siblings and instructs him to bring them back with him next time before dismissing him and leaving him alone in the snow. Not long after, Lucy finds Edmund, and the two return through the wardrobe to their own world. The following day, while playing outside, the children accidentally smash a window. Panicking at the thought of Mrs. Macready discovering what they've done, they rush inside and hide in the wardrobe. This time, all four siblings tumble into Narnia together. Lucy leads them through the forest to Mr. Tumnus's home, but they find the place completely destroyed. A notice nailed to the wall explains that Mr. Tumnus has been arrested for treason by the Queen of Narnia. As they leave the ruined home, they are approached by a talking beaver who somehow already knows Lucy's name. He hands her a handkerchief she once gave to Mr. Tumnus, confirming his fate. The beaver urges them to follow him, warning that the forest is dangerous after dark. They arrive at the beaver's cozy dam, where Mrs. Beaver warmly welcomes them with food and drink. There, the children learn about Aslan, the great lion, who has finally returned after a long absence and will soon be waiting for them at the stone table. Mr. Beaver then reveals an ancient prophecy. 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve are destined to overthrow the White Witch and restore peace to Narnia. Susan objects, saying they were sent away from home to avoid war, not to fight in one. Peter insists there must be some mistake and says they can't be the ones foretold, but their discussion is interrupted when they realize Edmund is missing. By the time they spot him, he is already heading toward the witch's icy palace. With no way to stop him, the group decides their only option is to seek out Aslan. At the witch's fortress, Edmund walks through a courtyard filled with stone statues, creatures frozen mid-motion. A wolf awakens and speaks to him, escorting Edmund into the throne room. The witch is furious that he failed to bring his siblings with him, but Edmund tries to redeem himself by revealing exactly where they are. Satisfied enough, she sends her wolves out to hunt them down. Only then does Edmund fully grasp the seriousness of his betrayal. Meanwhile, the wolves track the others to the beaver's home and discover a hidden passage. The children and the beavers escape just in time, sealing off the tunnel behind them. Along the way, they pass more stone statues, silent victims of the witch's curse. A talking fox appears and agrees to help them hide, misleading the wolves by claiming the group fled north. Once the wolves run off, the others climb down from hiding. The fox soon departs as well, explaining that Aslan has called for him to gather allies. Peter admits they don't want to fight a war, they only want to save their brother. Back at the palace, Edmund is now locked in the dungeon, chained and freezing. In a nearby cell, he finds Mr. Tumnus, who asks anxiously about Lucy's safety. Edmund has no answer. The witch soon appears and learns her wolves failed to catch the children. When Edmund mentions that Aslan has returned, she immediately prepares to pursue the others herself. Susan, Peter, and Lucy continue their journey with the beavers toward the stone table. While crossing a frozen lake, they spot a distant figure and flee in fear. Once hidden among the trees, Mr. Beaver signals that it's safe to come out, revealing the figure to be Santa Claus himself. He explains that the witch's power is weakening as hope returns to Narnia. He presents each child with a gift. Lucy receives a healing potion and a small blade. Susan is given a bow, arrows, and a horn for summoning help, and Peter is gifted a finely crafted sword etched with symbols. With a cheerful farewell and a blessing for Aslan, Santa departs in his sleigh. The group presses onward as winter begins to fade. The frozen lake starts cracking apart, and wolves attack while the children are trapped on breaking ice. Peter plunges his sword into the ice to keep himself steady, while Lucy and Susan cling on. The beavers swim safely beneath the surface, and together they all make it back to land. Before their eyes, trees burst into bloom and flowers open, signaling the end of the witch's endless winter. The air grows warmer, and the children leave their coats behind as they continue forward. Elsewhere, the witch reaches the river only to find the ice completely melted. Her wolves have captured the fox who deceived them. As she raises her staff, preparing to turn him to stone, she pauses. Edmund tries desperately to undo some of the damage he's caused. He pleads with the White Witch to spare the fox, offering her valuable information instead. He tells her that the others are heading toward the stone table, where Aslan is gathering his forces. The witch coldly thanks Edmund for his loyalty, and then turns the fox into stone anyway, proving how little mercy she truly has. Meanwhile, Peter, Susan, and Lucy, along with Mr. Beaver, arrive at Aslan's camp. The land has transformed, green grass stretches across the fields, and life has returned to Narnia. Creatures of every kind fill the area: centaurs, fawns, bears, boars, great cats, and even strange beings shaped from petals and leaves. All of them pause to stare at the children in awe, just as the children marvel at them in return. From a grand red and gold tent, Aslan emerges, and every creature bows. He greets the siblings warmly but immediately asks about Edmund. Peter explains that Edmund was captured, and Mr. Beaver admits that Edmund had betrayed them. Later, Aslan and Peter stand together on a hill overlooking a distant castle with 4 thrones. Aslan tells Peter that one day he will sit upon one of them as High King. He also speaks of the ancient magic that governs Narnia, a deep, binding law that shapes every fate in the land. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of Susan's horn. Peter rushes off and finds Susan and Lucy trapped in a tree by 2 wolves. Peter fights and kills one of them, while Aslan spares the other, ordering everyone to follow it. The wolf leads them straight to Edmund. Afterward, Aslan knights Peter, naming him Sir Peter Wolfsbane. As Peter rises, his role as a true leader of Narnia is sealed. At the witch's stronghold, her army prepares for war. Trolls, cyclopes, minotaurs, and other terrifying creatures gather as she discusses battle plans with her general. But before the fighting can begin, Aslan's scouts successfully rescue Edmund and return him safely to camp. Edmund reunites with his siblings, full of regret. Aslan gently tells him there is no need to dwell on the past. Peter suggests that Lucy and Susan should leave for safety, but Lucy refuses. Edmund insists on staying as well, determined to make amends for his mistakes. Susan also chooses to remain, practicing her archery while Peter and Edmund train on horseback. Suddenly, Mr. Beaver arrives with urgent news. The witch has demanded a meeting with Aslan and is already on her way. When she arrives, the witch declares that Edmund is a traitor and that, by ancient law, his life belongs to her. Aslan agrees to speak with her privately, and the two enter a tent alone. After some time, the witch emerges and announces that she has given up her claim on Edmund. Aslan confirms this, but does not explain the true cost of their bargain. That night, Lucy and Susan see Aslan walking away by himself. They try to follow, and when he notices them, he allows them to keep him company for a short while. Eventually, he asks them to wait behind, thanking them softly before continuing on alone. From a distance, the girls hear terrible noises. At the stone table, they witness the witch's creatures surrounding Aslan. He is bound, his mane cut away, dragged onto the table, and killed by the witch. With Aslan gone, the witch rallies her army and marches off toward battle. Once the area is deserted, Lucy and Susan run to Aslan's body, holding him and weeping. Small mice appear and gnaw through the ropes binding him. The wind carries petals through the forest, and far away, those same petals gather and take on human-like forms, bringing the devastating news back to camp. Peter confirms it when he finds Aslan's tent empty. Edmund tells Peter that leadership now falls to him, that Aslan believed he was ready. A centaur asks Peter for his command as the witch's army draws closer. Soon, a griffin lands beside Edmund, warning that the enemy greatly outnumbers them and is better armed. The centaur replies that numbers alone do not decide the outcome of a battle. In the distance, the witch's army advances, with her standing proudly atop a chariot pulled by polar bears. She orders her general to show no mercy and take no prisoners. The two armies surge toward one another as the battle begins. Creatures clash across the field while Peter's forces strike back, hippogriffs swooping overhead and dropping stones onto the advancing enemy. Peter and the centaur surge forward, leading the charge as the army forms a massive V-shaped formation. Lances are lowered, and the great cats sprint ahead as the first wave. Peter pulls down his helmet just as the two forces collide in a thunderous clash. Back at the stone table, Lucy and Susan remain beside Aslan's lifeless body. The first light of dawn begins to creep across the sky. Susan gently suggests that they should leave, noticing Lucy shivering from the cold. Wrapping an arm around her sister, they walk away, pausing once more to look back at Aslan. Suddenly, a deep crack splits the stone steps, racing toward the table. With a roar, the stone table shatters in two, and Aslan stands before them, alive, powerful, and restored, his mane flowing in full glory. Susan, stunned, asks how this could be possible. Aslan explains that the witch misunderstood the deeper meaning of the ancient magic. Had she known its full power, she might have acted differently. When an innocent life is willingly given in place of a traitor's, he explains, the stone table breaks and even death itself is undone. Realizing the others must already be fighting, Lucy insists they have to help. Aslan agrees and tells them to climb onto his back. He races them across the land to the witch's castle, where he uses his power to restore every creature frozen into stone. One by one, they awaken, including the centaur who had been frozen while defending Peter in battle. On the battlefield, Peter calls for a retreat, but is locked in combat with a powerful minotaur as the White Witch approaches. Edmund charges in to protect his brother, shattering the witch's staff, though he is badly injured in the process. Peter and the witch clash blades, but the fight is interrupted when Aslan arrives, roaring across the battlefield. The witch stares in disbelief as Aslan leads the newly freed creatures into battle. The tide turns, the enemy falls, and the war is finally won. Aslan confronts the witch and ends her reign once and for all. Lucy rushes to Edmund's side and uses her healing potion to save him. The siblings embrace in relief. Aslan continues freeing those still trapped, while Lucy helps heal the wounded scattered across the field. Soon after, a grand celebration is held at the great castle. Aslan walks down the hall with the two sons of Adam and the two daughters of Eve beside him. Before the 4 stone thrones, he proclaims their titles. Queen Lucy the Valiant, King Edmund the Just, Queen Susan the Gentle, and King Peter the Magnificent. Crowns are brought forward by the beavers and placed upon their heads by Mr. Tumnus. As they take their seats, Aslan declares that once a king or queen of Narnia, always a king or queen, wishing them wisdom until the stars themselves fall from the sky. Cheers fill the hall. Later, Lucy spots Aslan walking alone along the shore. Tumnus gently reassures her that there's no need to worry, that Aslan will return when he's needed. He's not a tame lion, he reminds her. Overcome with emotion, Lucy accepts the handkerchief she once gave him long ago. Years pass, and the 4 rulers, now grown, ride through the forest together. They come upon a lamppost that feels strangely familiar, like a half-forgotten dream. Lucy suddenly runs ahead into thick foliage, and the others follow, struggling through the branches. They stumble, argue, and push forward, until Susan notices a familiar coat. In an instant, all 4 tumble out of the wardrobe, transformed back into children once more. They lie on the floor in disbelief, only to be discovered by the professor, holding the very ball that once broke the window. To him, only moments have passed. He calmly asks what they were doing in the wardrobe. Peter replies that he wouldn't believe the answer. Smiling, the professor leans in and says, "Try me. Thanks for spending time with us revisiting this timeless story inspired by C.S. Lewis's novel first published in 1950. The film adaptation arrived in 2005, following an earlier miniseries from the late 80s. With that, we'll leave Narnia for now. Until next time. Analysis: what if running away from war didn't mean hiding underground? What if it meant opening a wardrobe and stepping into a world that was dying without hope? Imagine being a child, ripped away from your home, surrounded by fear, uncertainty, and silence. Now imagine discovering a hidden doorway to a land where animals speak, magic is real, and evil has frozen the world in endless winter. That's not just fantasy, that's Narnia. But The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is not simply a story about magic and mythical creatures. It's a story about responsibility arriving too early, about innocence being tested, about ordinary children forced to make extraordinary choices when the fate of an entire world rests on them. This movie stands out because beneath its fairy tale surface lies something deeper: questions about courage, betrayal, sacrifice, and belief. It asks what happens when fear tempts you, and whether redemption is still possible after you fall. In this video, we'll explore why this film continues to resonate years later, how it balances wonder with darkness, and why its message still matters today, whether you first watched it as a child or discovered it as an adult. So open the wardrobe, step into the snow, because Narnia isn't just a place you visit, it's a story that stays with you. Released in 2005, The Chronicles of Narnia. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe brought one of the most beloved fantasy worlds ever written to life on the big screen. At first glance, it looks like a classic family adventure: magic, talking animals, epic battles, and a clear fight between good and evil. But underneath that surface lies a carefully crafted world built on myth, morality, and emotional growth. The film blends high fantasy, mythology, and coming-of-age drama, creating a story that feels timeless rather than tied to any single generation. Its visual style leans into wonder and scale, while still keeping the focus on characters rather than spectacle alone. The setting moves between wartime England and the enchanted land of Narnia, a place trapped in eternal winter under the rule of a powerful tyrant. When four ordinary siblings stumble into this world by accident, they quickly realize they're not just visitors, they may be part of something far bigger than themselves. Without revealing spoilers, the premise is simple but powerful. A hidden world is broken, a prophecy waits to be fulfilled, and those least prepared are the ones destined to change everything. This chapter of Narnia isn't about complexity for complexity's sake, it's about clarity, clear choices, clear consequences, and a journey that slowly transforms fear into courage. And that's exactly why this movie works. At its heart, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe may look like a fantasy adventure, but that's only the surface layer. Yes, it belongs to high fantasy: magical lands, mythical creatures, ancient prophecies, and epic battles between good and evil. But beneath that spectacle lies something far more personal: a coming-of-age story about children forced to grow up before they're ready. One of the film's strongest themes is courage, not the loud, fearless kind, but the quiet courage of standing up when you're terrified. Each child faces fear differently. Leadership, doubt, temptation, and belief all collide as the story unfolds. Another powerful theme is sacrifice. The movie doesn't treat heroism as winning battles, it treats it as choosing others over yourself. This idea runs silently through the story, shaping its emotional core. Then there's redemption. The film makes it clear that making the wrong choice doesn't define you forever. What matters is whether you're willing to face the consequences and change. Tonally, the movie walks a careful line. It captures wonder and warmth, but never hides the darkness. There are moments of joy, humor, and awe, but also real danger, loss, and moral weight. That balance is why the story works for children, yet still speaks deeply to adults. Ultimately, this isn't just a fantasy for escapism. It's a story about belief: belief in goodness, belief in second chances, and belief that even the smallest, most ordinary people can shape the fate of a world. And that's what gives Narnia its lasting power. The story begins in the shadow of World War II. Bombs fall over London, sirens scream, and four siblings, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, are sent away from home for safety. They arrive at an old countryside house, far from danger, or so it seems. While exploring the house, Lucy stumbles upon something impossible: a wardrobe that leads not to coats but to snow-covered woods. On the other side lies Narnia, a land frozen in endless winter, where fear has replaced hope. At first, no one believes Lucy, But one by one, the siblings cross into Narnia themselves and quickly learn that this world is suffering under the rule of the White Witch, whose magic has trapped the land in eternal cold. Christmas never comes, trust is rare, and betrayal is always close. As they journey deeper, the children discover that their arrival was foretold. A prophecy speaks of 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve who will help end the witch's reign. But prophecy doesn't guarantee success, it only opens the door to choice. That choice becomes painfully clear when Edmund, feeling overlooked and tempted by power, betrays his siblings. His decision sets off a chain reaction that raises the stakes for everyone involved. The story stops being about exploration and becomes about consequence. Guided by allies and the quiet authority of Aslan, the children are pushed toward roles they never asked for. Leaders, warriors, and symbols of hope. Each step forward forces them to confront fear, responsibility, and the cost of doing what's right. This isn't a story driven by random events. Every action leads to another. Every mistake matters. And by the time Narnia reaches the brink of war, the children are no longer running from danger. They're walking straight into it. Because in Narnia, growing up isn't optional. It's survival, the ending of the Chronicles of Narnia. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe isn't just about winning a battle. It's about understanding the true cost of justice, mercy, and leadership. At the heart of the climax is an ancient law of Narnia: betrayal demands death. Edmund's actions place him firmly under that law, and the White Witch comes to collect what she believes is rightfully hers. Victory for good seems impossible, because evil is technically correct. This is where the story takes its most powerful turn. Aslan willingly offers himself in Edmund's place, not as a trick, not as a strategy, but as a conscious act of sacrifice. He submits to humiliation, suffering, and death, allowing evil to believe it has finally won. For a moment, hope is completely extinguished, but the witch's mistake isn't cruelty, it's ignorance. She understands the deep magic of law and punishment, but she doesn't understand the deeper magic, that when an innocent life is willingly given for another, death itself begins to work backward. Sacrifice breaks the rules that evil depends on. Aslan's return isn't just a resurrection, it's a statement. Power rooted in fear cannot survive love rooted in selflessness. The final battle that follows isn't framed as chaos or spectacle. It's order being restored. Roles are fulfilled. The children fight not as scared evacuees, but as leaders who have earned their place through growth, failure, and courage. When peace finally returns, the siblings rule Narnia for years, becoming wise, just kings and queens. And then, in an instant, they return to the wardrobe, back to childhood, back to wartime England. But they are not the same. The ending reminds us that time spent growing doesn't disappear. What you learn, what you become, stays with you. And that's the true magic of Narnia, one of the reasons the Chronicles of Narnia. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe continues to reward repeat viewings is because so much of its meaning lives between the lines, in symbols, visual clues, and quiet moments most viewers overlook. Let's start with winter without Christmas. It's more than a weather condition. It represents a world stripped of hope, joy, and renewal. Snow isn't magical here, it's suffocating. The absence of Christmas tells us Narnia isn't just frozen physically, but spiritually. Then there's Aslan himself. His presence changes the environment before he even appears on screen. Ice begins to melt, colors return. Animals act differently. The land responds to him instinctively, suggesting that true authority doesn't need force to be felt. The wardrobe is another powerful symbol. It isn't opened by strength or intelligence. It opens through curiosity and belief. Lucy enters Narnia because she's willing to accept wonder without proof. The others only follow once they're ready to let go of doubt. Edmund's early choices are filled with subtle foreshadowing. His body language, lingering glances, and isolation visually separate him from his siblings long before his betrayal becomes clear. The movie tells you what's coming, quietly. Even the White Witch's design tells a story. Her sharp lines, pale colors, and rigid posture contrast with Aslan's warmth and organic movement. One represents control and fear. The other represents balance and life. Nothing in Narnia is accidental. Every visual choice reinforces the same idea. Evil dominates through cold order. Good restores through warmth and sacrifice. And once you notice these details, the story doesn't just feel magical, it feels intentional behind the magic of the Chronicles of Narnia. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe lies a massive creative effort, one that pushed technology, performance, and filmmaking ambition to its limits. To begin with, the actors playing the Pevensey siblings didn't just show up and read lines. They went through months of training, including sword fighting, archery, and physical conditioning, so their transformation into leaders and warriors would feel earned, not staged. Aslan himself was a technical challenge. The filmmakers chose a hybrid approach, combining advanced CGI with real animal references and voice performance to give him weight, emotion, and authority. The goal wasn't realism alone, it was presence. Aslan had to feel like someone you'd follow without question. Many of Narnia's landscapes weren't digital at all. New Zealand's real-world locations were used extensively to ground the fantasy in something tangible. That decision is a big reason the world still feels real today, even as visual effects have evolved. Adapting a beloved book came with pressure. The filmmakers made a conscious choice to remain faithful to the spirit of C.S. Lewis's story, even if that meant avoiding modern trends or darker reimaginings. Some scenes from the novel were softened or rearranged to maintain a family-friendly tone without losing emotional impact. There are also moments viewers never saw. Several deleted scenes expanded on character relationships and Narnian lore, but were removed to keep pacing tight and the runtime accessible for younger audiences. What's most impressive is this: the film didn't rely on spectacle alone. Every technical decision, from costumes to creatures, served the story's emotional core, because in the end, Narnia wasn't built to impress you. It was built to make you believe. When people talk about early 2000s fantasy cinema, the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is often placed beside giants like The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. And while that comparison is inevitable, it also reveals what makes Narnia uniquely its own. Unlike The Lord of the Rings, which leans heavily into political complexity, moral gray areas, and relentless darkness, Narnia chooses moral clarity. Good and evil are clearly defined, not because the story is simple, but because it's focused on teaching choice, consequence, and responsibility. Compared to Harry Potter, which grows darker as its characters age, Narnia compresses growth into a single journey. Childhood ends quickly here. Innocence is challenged almost immediately. There's no slow transition, only the demand to rise when the moment arrives. Visually, Narnia doesn't chase gritty realism. It leans into myth and symbolism, embracing the feeling of a classic storybook brought to life. That makes it feel warmer, but also less edgy than its fantasy rivals. Where Narnia excels is emotional sincerity. It isn't ironic. It isn't cynical. It believes in the power of sacrifice, redemption, and leadership, and it never apologizes for that belief. Where it sometimes falls short is depth. The villains are less complex. The world building, while beautiful, isn't as layered or politically rich as other fantasy franchises. But that's the point. Narnia isn't trying to overwhelm you, it's trying to guide you. And in a genre often obsessed with darkness, that choice is exactly what makes it stand apart. When the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was released, it arrived with enormous expectations. A beloved book, a massive budget, and the impossible task of standing shoulder to shoulder with the fantasy giants of its era. Audience reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Families embraced it. Younger viewers were drawn into its magic, while adults connected with its deeper emotional and moral layers. For many, this film became a childhood memory, one that aged better with time rather than fading away. Critics, however, were more divided. Some praised the film's sincerity, world building, and emotional core, calling it a rare fantasy that respected its audience. Others felt it played things too safely, too traditional, too clear-cut in its morality, especially when compared to darker, more complex fantasy films dominating the genre. At the box office, the movie was a clear success, proving that there was still a massive appetite for earnest, large-scale fantasy storytelling. Yet despite that success, it often gets left out of modern fantasy discussions, overshadowed by longer-running franchises. And that's where the conversation changes. Over time, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe has quietly earned a new reputation, not as overrated, but as underrated. Revisited years later, its emotional honesty, practical effects, and thematic confidence stand out even more clearly. It didn't try to redefine fantasy. It didn't chase trends. It told its story sincerely and trusted that would be enough. And for many viewers, it still is. So where does the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe ultimately stand? At its best, this film understands something many fantasy stories forget. Spectacle means nothing without heart. Its greatest strength lies in its emotional clarity. The story knows what it believes in: courage over fear, sacrifice over power, and redemption over punishment. The performances, especially from the younger cast, feel sincere rather than forced. The world of Narnia is visually rich without drowning in excess, and Aslan remains one of fantasy cinema's most powerful symbols of leadership, not because of strength, but because of moral authority. That said, the film isn't flawless. Some viewers may find the villains too one-dimensional. Others may wish the story took more risks or explored its darker elements more deeply. Compared to more complex fantasy universes, Narnia can feel straightforward, even restrained. But that simplicity is also its purpose. This movie is ideal for families, fantasy lovers, and anyone who appreciates stories with clear moral grounding. It's especially rewarding for viewers revisiting it as adults, discovering layers they didn't notice the first time. Final verdict: The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe isn't trying to be the darkest fantasy ever made. It's trying to be an honest one. And in doing so, it delivers a timeless story that reminds us why fantasy exists in the first place, not to escape reality, but to better understand it. Reviewers. From a technical standpoint, this film is undeniably impressive. Not too long ago, attempting a believable live-action adaptation of The Lion, The Witch, and the Wardrobe would have been unrealistic. The visual effects simply weren't advanced enough to bring talking animals, mythical creatures, and an enchanted world to life in a convincing way. Thanks to modern CGI and powerful digital tools, that barrier no longer exists, and Disney clearly took advantage of that progress. Visually, the film captures the essence of the book remarkably well, and as someone familiar with the source material, I appreciated how closely the main storyline follows C.S. Lewis's original vision. That said, while everything appears to be in the right place, the film never truly pulled me in on an emotional level. Once the spectacle faded, I was left with a lingering sense of emptiness, almost a "was that it" feeling. Part of this reaction may stem from unavoidable comparisons. The Lord of the Rings trilogy set an incredibly high standard for epic fantasy cinema, with its emotional depth, narrative complexity, and grand scale. When placed side by side, Narnia feels smaller and less layered, making those differences hard to ignore. Visually, however, the film is often stunning. The snowy landscapes of Narnia are beautifully realized, and some scenes evoke memories of Middle-earth in their design and atmosphere. Not every effect works perfectly, though. Certain moments, like the children and the beavers racing across the ice, lean a little too heavily on obvious digital effects, breaking the illusion slightly. The filmmakers also try to inject humor here and there, such as the professor's dry remark about Lucy being the weeping one, but these lighter touches don't always land. Because the film leans toward a darker tone overall, the humor feels somewhat out of place. Where the movie shines is in several of its performances. The child actors bring genuine energy, with Georgie Henley standing out as Lucy. Her portrayal feels more natural and engaging than earlier adaptations. James McAvoy brings warmth and charm to Mr. Tumnus, while Liam Neeson's voice work gives Aslan a noble, commanding presence. Still, the standout performance belongs to Tilda Swinton. Her White Witch dominates every scene she's in, delivering a controlled yet chilling performance that makes her genuinely intimidating. While the film remains mostly faithful to the book, the additional dialogue and expanded scenes don't always add much emotional weight. Overall, it's an enjoyable experience, but one with noticeable flaws. The story follows the Pevensey siblings, evacuated from wartime London during the Blitz, who stumble upon a wardrobe that serves as a portal to the magical land of Narnia. It's been years since I last read the novels, and while I wouldn't call them personal favorites, the core concept remains appealing. My biggest issue lies with the children themselves. They're written as loud, argumentative, and often irritating, especially Edmund. His constant whining and suspicious demeanor make it difficult to sympathize with him. Lucy, while sweet, can feel overly excitable, and the two older siblings spend far too much time bickering. Tilda Swinton's witch, while visually striking, is portrayed as overtly evil right from the start, which raises questions about Edmund's inability to recognize her danger. A more subtle introduction might have made his betrayal more believable. Still, the true strength of the film is the world of Narnia itself. It feels magical yet familiar, a fantasy realm that echoes the real world while remaining distinct. The CGI creatures are handled well, appearing convincing enough to maintain immersion. There's no denying the film's visual appeal. It's beautiful, imaginative, and impressive to look at. But when it comes to pacing, storytelling, and emotional depth, it moves slowly and never fully takes off. I remain unconvinced that heavy reliance on CGI is always superior to the practical artistry of classic fantasy films like The Wizard of Oz, The Blue Bird, or Lost Horizon. There's something about tangible sets and real environments that allows actors and audiences to connect more deeply with the story. The background lore of Narnia is introduced rather abruptly, with little effort made to fully ground the audience in its history or significance. As a result, the world sometimes feels more like a backdrop than a place worth deeply caring about. The idea of intelligent animals and mystical beings is certainly fun, and when those creatures turn hostile, they become even more unsettling because they can express intent and emotion. Still, the children themselves feel like standard modern movie characters rather than individuals shaped by their wartime experiences. The The concept of a beautiful yet dangerous villain is strong, and Swinton's restrained makeup and elegant wardrobe choices work well. However, the character lacks depth, making her less memorable than some of fantasy cinema's great antagonists. In the end, while the digital landscapes are undeniably attractive, fully enjoying them requires overlooking how artificial they sometimes feel. In summary, The Chronicles of Narnia is a visually rich and competently made film that succeeds on a technical level, but struggles to leave a lasting emotional impact. It's entertaining, occasionally powerful, but ultimately falls short of becoming a truly timeless fantasy classic. I actually enjoyed this film more on my second viewing than I did the first time, though I still wouldn't call it anything beyond decent. My biggest hurdle with this adaptation is a personal one. I watched the BBC miniseries as a child, and it left a powerful mark on me. Looking back now, its dated effects and theatrical performances feel charming rather than embarrassing. Part of me wants to revisit it to see how it holds up, while another part prefers to keep that memory untouched, where it probably shines brightest. This newer version retells the same story, clearly shaped for a modern audience. It borrows heavily from the visual language and pacing of epic fantasy franchises like The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, aiming for the same age group. In doing so, it sacrifices much of the story's depth, streamlining character development in favor of an almost non-stop pursuit that drives most of the runtime. That said, the opening half hour is genuinely strong and easily the film's best stretch. The young cast delivers convincing performances, the costumes are impressive, and the visual effects feel fresh and immersive. The final 30 minutes also stand out, exploding into a large-scale CGI-heavy battle reminiscent of Return of the King. I found myself enjoying the sheer momentum of it all, fast, chaotic, and filled with fantastical creatures like minotaurs, griffins, dwarves, and monsters clashing in an all-out war. Unfortunately, the middle portion drags the experience down. This is where the film leans too hard into whimsy, trapping us in an endless loop of chase, capture, escape, and repeat. The talking beavers feel overly cartoonish, and the wolf antagonists look rough even by early 2000 standards. By the time the story regains focus, we haven't really learned much more about the children than we knew at the start. Edmund remains selfish, Peter naturally steps into leadership, Lucy stays sweet and innocent, and Susan, frankly, comes off as irritating more often than not. On the positive side, the technical achievements are impressive overall, and the voice cast adds real weight. The actor voicing Aslan brings authority and warmth to the role. Supporting performances also shine more than expected. There's warmth, gravitas, and menace where needed, especially from the actress portraying the White Witch, who delivers an unsettling presence throughout. Had the film slowed down and allowed its characters more room to breathe, I would have enjoyed it far more. Still, it remains pleasant enough entertainment. There's an old rule in writing children's stories: never talk down to children. That principle is one of the main reasons C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia has endured for generations, and it's also why this adaptation works as well as it does. Even if nothing else, it's hard to imagine this film not earning awards recognition for its visual effects. Before revisiting this story, I looked into Lewis's background and learned that he began writing the first Narnia book during World War II. At the time, many British families sent their children to the countryside to escape the bombing of major cities, much like the Pevensey children in the story. Lewis drew from his faith and imagination to create an escape, a fantastical refuge for children facing uncertainty, fear, and real loss. British children grow up on tales of knights, legends, and folklore. Combine that with mythical creatures, talking animals with human souls, a cruel sorceress, and a noble beast who represents hope, and you have Narnia. It's also no coincidence that the savior figure takes the form of a lion, a symbol deeply rooted in British identity. This wasn't an arbitrary choice, and it adds another layer of meaning to the story. The timing of the book's release in 1950 also mattered. With global tensions high and the Cold War looming, families craved escapism for their children and themselves. Reading the Chronicles of Narnia likely became a quiet comfort for many households. The film itself follows 4 siblings who are sent away from London during wartime and end up staying in the home of an eccentric professor. The youngest, Lucy, discovers a hidden world inside a wardrobe, an icy realm ruled by a cruel witch. When her siblings eventually follow her into this land, an ancient prophecy begins to unfold, leading to a final confrontation between tyranny and freedom. At its core, the story champions timeless values: honesty over deceit, loyalty over betrayal, sacrifice over selfishness, and love over hatred. The visual effects bring these ideas to life through an imaginative bestiary of creatures. However, the actress playing Lucy struggles to carry such a central role, often relying on the same expression, which weakens some otherwise emotional scenes. Despite its flaws, the film remains an engaging fantasy adventure with heart, spectacle, and ambition. It may not fully capture the magic of its source material, or the memories many of us carry, but it still offers a worthwhile journey into a world that has enchanted readers and viewers for decades. Set against the backdrop of World War II, the story begins as four siblings, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, are evacuated from London to escape the relentless bombing. They are sent to stay in the vast and quiet country home of the absent-minded Professor Kirk. With little to do and far too much space to explore, the children pass their time wandering the house until Lucy stumbles upon something extraordinary, a wardrobe that serves as a gateway to another world. At first, Lucy's tale of a frozen land filled with talking creatures is dismissed as imagination by her older siblings. That disbelief doesn't last long. Before they know it, all four children find themselves stepping into the snowy realm of Narnia, a place locked in eternal winter and ruled by the cruel White Witch. What begins as wonder and discovery soon turns dangerous when betrayal strikes from within the family, forcing the children into the center of a growing conflict between good and evil, one that will decide the fate of Narnia itself. I'll admit that lingering fatigue from the Lord of the Rings trilogy initially kept me from embracing this film when it was released, despite my fond memories of C.S. Lewis's books. Watching it later on television, however, I found myself acknowledging that, on a broad level, the film does succeed. From a technical standpoint, it's undeniably impressive. The visual effects are polished and believable, the creation of Narnia feels fully realized, and the large-scale battle scenes are handled with confidence, even if some character designs stretch realism in amusing ways. Where the film stumbles, however, is not in spectacle but in substance. While the source material is strong, the movie struggles to translate emotional depth onto the screen. The story touches on heavy themes, including sacrifice, faith, and loss, and I wasn't personally distracted by its Christian symbolism, though I can understand why some viewers might be. What surprised me more was how frequently characters meet grim ends, yet these darker elements feel oddly shallow, existing more as isolated events than meaningful emotional moments. The pacing doesn't help. The film moves briskly from one major plot point to the next, rarely pausing to let scenes breathe or characters fully develop. As a result, much of the experience feels like watching a well-produced display rather than becoming immersed in a deeply engaging story. The screenplay focuses heavily on action and narrative beats, often at the expense of character growth. This may reflect director Andrew Adamson's background in visual effects and animation rather than character-driven drama. The young cast fits the tone and setting well, but they are given limited material to work with. While the performances are serviceable, none of the children are afforded the opportunity to show much range beyond their basic roles. In contrast, Tilda Swinton's portrayal of the White Witch stands out dramatically. She brings real menace and authority to the screen, and the film is at its strongest whenever she appears. The supporting cast delivers mixed but generally solid performances. Jim Broadbent, James McAvoy, James Cosmo, and others do what's required of them, while Ray Winstone adds a touch of humor as the Beaver. A particularly memorable contribution comes from the voice of the main wolf, whose cold and threatening tone leaves a strong impression. In the end, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a visually stunning fantasy with plenty to offer audiences seeking adventure, magic, and large-scale action. However, viewers hoping for emotional richness, layered characters, or narrative depth may find it lacking. That said, just as other fantasy franchises have grown stronger with time, this series may well deepen as it progresses. While it didn't fully win me over, it did enough to make me curious about where Narnia might go next. This film offers more than enough spectacle and excitement to keep audiences talking right up until its grand finale. Despite a lengthy runtime and the inherent challenge of translating such a richly layered literary work to the screen, the movie maintains a steady and engaging rhythm, especially for viewers unfamiliar with C.S. Lewis's detailed storytelling. At nearly 2.5 hours, this adaptation stays remarkably faithful to the original source, more so than earlier attempts, many of which leaned heavily on animation. Visually, the film is vibrant and immersive, with lush cinematography that brings the fantasy world to life in striking color and texture. The musical score complements the action beautifully, enhancing both the sense of adventure and emotional depth throughout. Direction is confident and imaginative, balancing intimate character moments with large-scale fantasy sequences. The result is an experience that feels both epic and accessible. Overall, this is an above-average film and well worth watching. It's an enjoyable fantasy adventure that appeals strongly to children and teenagers while remaining entertaining for adults and families alike. What stood out most to me was the impressive technical craftsmanship, particularly during the battle scenes. The vivid imagery and imaginative creature designs feel almost painterly, like classic fantasy artwork stepping off the canvas and onto the screen. From the imposing White Queen riding into combat in her chariot to the mix of mythical beings joining the fray, the clash between reality and imagination is handled with striking creativity. That blend of the fantastical and the tangible gives the story a sense of grandeur, elevating what begins as the journey of four siblings into a much larger mythic quest rooted in prophecy and destiny. Depending on one's viewing background, the film may feel refreshingly original or faintly reminiscent of other fantasy worlds, but that hardly matters. Once the children pass into the hidden realm, the audience is drawn in alongside them, sharing their fears, losses, and eventual triumphs. Not having read the original novels myself, I can't make a direct comparison, but the film succeeds in sparking interest in Lewis's writing, suggesting an imagination every bit as rich as other great fantasy authors. The young cast delivers strong and believable performances, making the Pevensey siblings easy to connect with. This film also marked an early standout performance from Tilda Swinton, whose presence leaves a lasting impression. Based on this installment alone, anticipation for future entries in the series feels well justified. The story itself centers on four siblings, Lucy, Edmund, Peter, and Susan, sent away from wartime London to the countryside for safety. They stay in a large, mysterious house owned by a reserved professor, where strict rules and boredom soon push them toward exploration. During a game of hide-and-seek, one of the children stumbles upon a wardrobe that serves as a gateway to another world. There they encounter strange creatures, hidden dangers, and a frozen land ruled by a deceptive and dangerous queen. As all four children eventually enter this new realm, they become entangled in its conflict. Betrayal, courage, and redemption shape their journey as they learn the true nature of the enemy and their own role in an ancient prophecy. Guided by allies and ultimately by the rightful ruler of the land, they are drawn into a decisive battle that will determine the fate of the world they've discovered. The performances across the board are solid, with particularly strong turns from the film's main antagonist and its noble spiritual guide. The visual effects are impressive, the action sequences are exciting without being overwhelming, and while the film may not redefine the genre, it delivers exactly what it promises. A well-crafted fantasy adventure. Produced in Britain and filled with imaginative detail, it stands as a memorable entry in family cinema. The film's technical achievements were widely recognized, earning major awards and nominations for makeup, sound, visual effects, costumes, and music. These honors reflect the care and creativity poured into every aspect of the production. Ultimately, this adaptation is a testament to the remarkable imagination behind its source material and serves as a compelling reminder of how powerful fantasy storytelling can be when handled with respect and vision. Lucy stumbles into an ordinary wardrobe while playing hide-and-seek, never imagining that it hides an extraordinary secret. Instead of a wooden back panel, she steps into a frozen world where snow blankets the ground and a lone street lamp glows in the distance. It's here that she encounters Mr. Tumnus, a gentle, scarf-wearing faun who introduces her to the strange and magical land of Narnia. Shaken but excited, Lucy returns home and eventually convinces her brothers and sister to follow her through the wardrobe. Together, the Pevensey children uncover a realm filled with wonder, danger, unexpected friendships, and menacing wolves lurking in the shadows. This marks the beginning of the Pevenseys' journey into Narnia, a land where animals speak, myths walk freely, and winter has ruled endlessly under the cold authority of the White Witch. As the children learn more about this world, they are drawn into a larger destiny involving Aslan, the majestic and powerful lion who represents hope for Narnia's future. A final confrontation looms as the children join forces to challenge the witch's icy domination and restore balance to the kingdom. From a technical standpoint, the visual effects don't always hold up well. Even for its time, some CGI moments feel dated and lacking polish. However, the environments, overall world building, and character portrayals help compensate for these shortcomings. Harry Gregson Williams' musical score stands out in particular, adding emotional depth with its haunting yet tender melodies. Much discussion has surrounded the religious symbolism associated with C.S. Lewis's story, particularly through the character of Aslan. While those parallels are noticeable, they aren't required to appreciate or understand the film. The story functions perfectly well as a fantasy adventure without needing to interpret it through a religious lens. Personally, while I found the movie enjoyable, it never quite reached the level of greatness. There's a universal fascination with stories about secret gateways to other worlds. This idea has appeared many times before, from classic fantasies to more modern interpretations. In this story, the youngest Pevensey child, evacuated from wartime London to the countryside during World War II, accidentally discovers such a passage hidden in plain sight. Moving past rows of old coats, she finds herself somewhere entirely unexpected, far removed from the quiet estate outside. Soon, all four siblings find themselves in Narnia, a land frozen in an unnatural century-long winter enforced by the ruthless White Witch. Along the way, they learn that they are destined to help bring spring back and correct the injustices plaguing this world. Professor Kirk, the owner of the country house, appears to have some knowledge of Narnia's existence. Hints suggest he may even have visited the land himself in his youth, but his role remains vague and unexplained. By the end, his purpose feels unresolved, unless one is already familiar with the books. Ultimately, the film delivers competent entertainment, but little more. Perhaps expectations were too high following the massive success of other fantasy franchises released around the same time. It may be that the source material lacked enough cinematic weight, or simply that the adaptation didn't fully capture its potential. Whatever the reason, the film falls short of its promise. One noticeable issue lies with the portrayal of the children themselves. While modern fantasy often places young characters at the center of epic stories, this film struggles to make their transformation believable. The leap from frightened children to confident leaders and warriors feels rushed and unearned. Unlike other fantasy heroes, who gradually grow into their roles while showing doubt and vulnerability, the Pevensey siblings seem to inherit bravery overnight due to prophecy alone. The emotional intensity is also lacking. Despite the fate of an entire magical world hanging in the balance, there are few truly gripping moments. The dialogue often feels plain and uninspired, and the drama never reaches a level that fully pulls the viewer in. In the end, it feels more like a children's story presented with an adult budget rather than a fully realized epic. Financially, the movie was undeniably successful, earning far more than its substantial production cost. It was adapted from the first book published in the series, though chronologically it isn't the beginning of the story. Subsequent films followed, adapting later entries in the series over the years, but none managed to fully recapture the anticipation or impact hoped for when Narnia first arrived on the big screen. It was only in 1955, with The Magician's Nephew, that C.S. Lewis fully revealed how the world of Narnia came into existence, exploring the very birth of that magical universe. This cinematic adaptation, developed collaboratively by Anne Peacock, Christopher Marcus, Stephen McFeely, and director Andrew Adamson, functions almost as a direct visual translation of the original book. Very little is altered in terms of narrative structure or events. Unlike The Lord of the Rings, written by Lewis's close friend J.R.R. Tolkien, where characters were removed, merged, or expanded for cinematic pacing, Narnia remains extremely faithful. Nearly every scene mirrors a corresponding passage from the novel, resulting in a grand fantasy journey through enchanted lands that exist parallel to real-world history, specifically during the Second World War. This contrast is meaningful. While Europe is torn apart by conflict, Lewis's story, written during that same turbulent era, offers purity, moral clarity, and wonder. The film preserves this spirit, presenting an adventure rich in symbolism, hope, and imagination, qualities that have allowed generations of readers to believe in the possibility of a better world. Where the film falters, however, is in Andrew Adamson's handling of character performances. The young cast is largely directed in a flat, one-dimensional manner. Among them, Georgie Henley stands out, mostly due to her natural charm, evoking echoes of Drew Barrymore's screen presence in E.T. The four siblings are portrayed as rigid archetypes rather than fully realized individuals. The responsible eldest brother burdened by leadership, the practical and nurturing sister, the angry rebel shaped by grief over his father's death, and the youngest child whose wide-eyed wonder embraces magic without hesitation. These roles feel mechanically assigned, and the emotional exchanges, especially the conflicts between Peter and Edmund, often feel forced, existing primarily to justify an expected reconciliation by the film's conclusion. In contrast, the supporting cast elevates the film considerably. James McAvoy delivers warmth and vulnerability as the gentle Mr. Tumnus, while Tilda Swinton brings an icy menace and commanding presence to the White Witch. Liam Neeson's voice performance as Aslan is solemn, powerful, and emotionally resonant, adding gravitas whenever the character appears. Despite the story's predictability, this is not the film's greatest flaw. The real issue lies in its persistent lack of tension. From the opening scenes, where Nazi planes fly over London, the film adopts a strangely safe and reassuring tone, subtly assuring the audience that no real danger will ever materialize. While the film is aimed at children, this choice is difficult to justify. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, made for an even more sheltered audience decades earlier, managed to create genuine suspense and emotional weight. By comparison, the White Witch here feels less threatening. Her power seems diminished almost immediately by the arrival of the Pevensey children, as winter begins to weaken the moment they step into Narnia. Even the battle sequences fail to generate a true sense of risk. The heroes move through combat as if protected by invisible armor, more like participants in a staged game than warriors facing mortal danger. The absence of blood reinforces this sense of artificiality, draining the conflict of urgency. That said, the film does contain intriguing thematic ideas. The notion of children escaping one war only to become entangled in another is quietly compelling. A subtle but effective moment occurs when Peter watches British soldiers, his expression revealing frustration at being unable to fight for his country, a role he ultimately fulfills only within Narnia. Yet other narrative choices raise questions. The White Witch repeatedly spares her most dangerous enemies by merely freezing them, a decision that feels illogical given her supposed ruthlessness. Similarly, when General Aureus pledges loyalty until death, the moment invites curiosity. What has Peter done to earn such unwavering devotion? A similar disconnect appears during a key character's death. The emotional reaction feels unearned, both because the sacrifice lacks sufficient buildup and because the grief shown by those mourning seems disproportionate to their relationship with the fallen figure. Ultimately, Adamson's background as a visual effects specialist is evident. As with Shrek in Shrek 2, his priorities lean heavily toward spectacle rather than narrative depth. On a technical level, the film excels. The digital creatures are impressively rendered, the production design is expansive, and the final battle is visually stunning. The clash of countless fantastical races, centaurs, griffins, giants, fauns, wolves, rhinos, and even weapon-wielding beavers, is undeniably striking. It is a feast for the eyes, even if it lacks the emotional intensity that could have elevated it into something truly unforgettable. After all, this is a film primarily aimed at children. Still, the action sequences manage to feel bold and energetic enough to hold attention. Much of what unfolds happens in broad daylight, bathed in warm sunlight, and the filmmakers don't shy away from showcasing their computer-generated visuals openly. That said, Donald McAlpin's cinematography often feels uncomfortably familiar. In particular, the scenes depicting the villains forging their weapons echo imagery that is hard not to associate with Peter Jackson's fantasy epics. The combat choreography also leaves something to be desired. There is a heavy emphasis on dramatic posing, but very little genuine motion or intensity. This is especially noticeable during the duel between Peter and the Witch, where the fight looks staged rather than thrilling. The musical score by Harry Gregson Williams doesn't help much either. From the very beginning, when the children flee the housekeeper to an overly tense and monumental theme, the soundtrack feels exaggerated. If the music is already this bombastic so early on, it's no surprise that nearly every moment of the film is drowned in orchestral excess, leaving little room for silence or subtlety. Both the film and the original book series are widely recognized for their Christian symbolism, which fits neatly into the familiar Disney storytelling formula. Themes of sacrifice, sin, repentance, and redemption are woven throughout the narrative. Many viewers will quickly notice that Aslan's actions mirror those traditionally associated with Christ. His willingness to die in Edmund's place, accepting humiliation and death to save another, strongly parallels the crucifixion and the idea of salvation. His resurrection reinforces this connection, while the White Witch functions as a clear embodiment of evil, with her wolves acting as demonic extensions of her power. Additional symbolism reinforces this religious framework. Aslan is described as the son of the Emperor beyond the sea, a figure that aligns with the concept of a divine father. The children resemble disciples. Edmund takes on the role of the betrayer, and Peter mirrors the biblical Peter in leadership. Even the detail of the two girls being the first to witness Aslan's return echoes scripture. At its core, the story is a straightforward clash between good and evil, offering lessons in friendship, loyalty, courage, forgiveness, faith, and love. Despite these themes, the film feels unnecessarily long. At nearly 140 minutes, the pacing becomes exhausting, and emotional engagement fades rather than deepens. One particularly uncomfortable moment comes with the appearance of Santa Claus distributing weapons to the children, including the youngest among them, while insisting these are tools rather than toys. It's a strange and unsettling image, one that unintentionally reflects a world so cynical that even Santa Claus is now an arms dealer. The film's biggest weakness is its simplicity. The storytelling is extremely direct, leaving little room for nuance or complexity. This is clearly a movie designed for younger audiences, particularly children under 10. To enjoy it fully, viewers need to lower their expectations regarding narrative depth and simply appreciate the impressive visuals. However, for audiences accustomed to richer fantasy worlds like Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings, disappointment is almost inevitable. Yes, the film won an Oscar for Best Makeup and spawned 2 sequels, but one can't help wondering how long the producers can sustain this cinematic universe. So far, the on-screen version of Narnia has failed to capture the same level of fascination that the books achieved with readers. Writing about major films like this is enjoyable precisely because most viewers are already familiar with the mainstream reactions and controversies. That allows space to explore less obvious aspects. Personally, I was never drawn to C.S. Lewis's romanticized Christianity or his heavy reliance on allegory, especially when compared to the imaginative brilliance of Alice in Wonderland or the enduring mythic richness of the King Arthur legends. While I often found Lewis's prose dry and academic, I can't deny that his storytelling possessed a certain charm that resonated with many readers. Interestingly, one element lost in the film adaptations is the narrator's voice, which openly comments on events in the books. That layer of personality and whimsy is absent in both modern films. For comparison, the 1988 BBC adaptation is well worth watching. Despite its limited budget, it feels more magical and sincere, and its child actors, aside from the youngest girl, are arguably stronger. Neither version fully conveys the Queen's supernatural power, relying instead on performance intensity. In this regard, the exaggerated screaming Queen of the 1988 version actually fits the world better. Watching the older adaptation also highlights how derivative the modern film feels. A surprising number of shots are near replicas of earlier versions. Unlike truly inventive productions, Aliens comes to mind, this film lacks distinctive visual design. Characters, costumes, and even action beats feel recycled, with many supporting villains reduced to uninspired rubber mask designs. Almost everything feels familiar, predictable, and safe. Almost everything, except Tilda. Magic, when it works on screen, isn't just about spells or creatures. It's about atmosphere, wonder, and belief. Unfortunately, that essential sense of enchantment is mostly missing here. Nothing truly feels otherworldly. There's none of the playful imagination found in Time Bandits, nor the mythic weight present in the stronger moments of The Lord of the Rings. The environments look flat, the so-called magical locations feel strangely ordinary, and the visual language rarely inspires awe. I've always admired Tilda Swinton's work. She's an actor I'll follow into almost any project, expecting something memorable. To be fair, she does deliver a commanding presence during the final confrontation, where her intensity finally matches the scale of the story. Sadly, that moment is undercut by the awkwardly handled, stone table sequence that comes before it. The staging feels archaic in the worst way, more like something lifted from an old pulp-era cannibal film than a modern fantasy epic. The set design is clumsy and unconvincing, lacking both elegance and menace. This is not a director who understands visual extravagance or theatrical flair. The irony is that Swinton clearly understands this world better than the film's director does. She appears to have constructed her character almost independently, through costume, makeup, and performance, filling a creative void left by weak direction. While some of her choices are striking, they feel disconnected from everything else. Not fully aligned with the book, not supported by the film's visual logic, and certainly not integrated into the director's uneven vision. What does work, though, stands out sharply. The young actress playing Lucy is genuinely engaging. The witch, in moments of action, is mesmerizing, and there is one exceptional cinematic flourish that briefly reminds us what fantasy can be. When Lucy pulls back the sheet covering the wardrobe and reveals the carved tree inside, the movement of the fabric is beautifully staged, simple, graceful, and genuinely magical. That moment lingers because it's done with confidence and restraint. It was wisely highlighted in the trailer. Unfortunately, the film never reaches that level again. Lucy's wide-eyed stare is repeated so often afterward that it loses its impact. Worse still, that one perfect visual arrives before the world of Narnia is even revealed, leaving the audience searching in vain for more moments like it. There's another sequence that hints at what could have been. During Lucy's hypnotic episode, ghostly satyrs appear dancing in the fire, a layered dream image that suggests ambiguity and imagination. In more daring hands, this could have implied that Narnia itself might be a projection of Lucy's inner world, just as the original author subtly allowed. But the idea is never explored. One creative choice, however, is unmistakably deliberate and deeply disappointing. The film leans heavily into World War II imagery, exaggerating the Nazi symbolism. The opening bombing sequence paints the enemy as monstrous caricatures, which in turn shapes the witch's cold, Aryan visual coding. From there, the story awkwardly shifts tone. War begins as horrific and senseless, then quietly transforms into something noble and heroic once weapons enter the fantasy realm and children are enlisted as warriors. The transition feels ideologically forced. The narrative reframes conflict as righteous once it's rebranded as a moral crusade, stripping away the nuance of the original British wartime perspective. Despite all this, the film remains broadly accessible. As a family-friendly fantasy, it offers talking animals, grand battles, and modern digital effects that will undoubtedly appeal to younger viewers. The original story, written in 1950, imagined a group of siblings discovering an entire world hidden inside a wardrobe, an ordinary piece of furniture transformed into a portal of wonder. That concept alone remains powerful. Earlier screen adaptations stuck rigidly to the source material, sometimes to their detriment. While visually faithful, they suffered from limited production values and theatrical awkwardness. This newer version takes more creative liberties, streamlining the story and heightening the drama. In most cases, these changes make the narrative smoother and more digestible for contemporary audiences. Yet for all its technical polish, the film struggles with imagination. It delivers spectacle but rarely wonder. It explains when it should suggest, and it stages fantasy as action rather than mystery. In the end, it's an entertaining experience for children, an impressive showcase of effects, but a missed opportunity for true cinematic magic. As World War II looms over Britain, the Pevensey siblings, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, are sent away from London to the peaceful English countryside for their safety. They are placed under the care of the absent-minded yet intriguing Professor Kirk, whose sprawling old estate seems to stretch endlessly with its countless rooms, corridors, and hidden corners. Overseeing the house is the stern and irritable Mrs. Macready, a woman with little tolerance for the energy and curiosity of children. During a playful moment that spirals into trouble, the siblings accidentally damage part of the house and scramble to avoid Mrs. Macready's wrath. In their attempt to hide, they stumble upon something far more extraordinary than they could have imagined, a large wardrobe that serves as a gateway to another world entirely. This moment marks a notable shift from the original novel, adding a bit of cinematic chaos to the children's discovery. Unknown to the others, Lucy, the youngest of the group, had already encountered the wardrobe's secret. Earlier, she had stepped through it alone and found herself in a breathtaking snow-covered land where she befriended a gentle fawn and shared tea in his cozy woodland refuge. When she first tells her siblings about this strange new world, they dismiss her tale as childish fantasy. That disbelief doesn't last long. Edmund, the most conflicted and morally fragile of the siblings, eventually finds his own way into this frozen realm. His journey leads him not to comfort, but to danger, an encounter with the ruthless White Witch, ruler of the land. She tempts him with promises of power and status, manipulating his weaknesses and convincing him to betray his own family. It soon becomes clear that the witch fears the Pevensey children, as prophecy foretells that they will one day bring an end to her reign. When Lucy learns that her fawn friend has been imprisoned, the siblings commit to rescuing him, unaware that Edmund has already chosen another path. His betrayal sets off a chain of events that forces the others to flee for their lives, as the witch sends her wolves to hunt them down. Their escape is aided by a pair of warm-hearted beavers who guide them through hidden tunnels and across dangerous waters, scenes that take some creative liberties compared to the original story, but add momentum and spectacle. Eventually, the children align themselves with the forces of good, an alliance of animals and mythical beings led by the noble and awe-inspiring lion, Aslan. He stands as the witch's ultimate opponent, embodying wisdom, strength, and sacrifice. The film's visual effects bring Aslan to life with astonishing realism, making him feel like a living, breathing presence rather than a digital creation. His voice performance adds gravitas and emotional depth to the character. The story builds toward a massive final confrontation between the witch's army and the forces led by Peter. While the battle is intense and visually grand, the film avoids graphic violence, keeping its tone suitable for its intended younger audience. Despite the scale of the conflict, it remains largely bloodless and restrained for a PG-rated fantasy. Beneath its adventurous surface, the film subtly carries spiritual themes, particularly through Aslan's selfless actions. However, these ideas are woven gently into the narrative rather than pushed aggressively. Viewers who are not searching for symbolism can easily enjoy the film purely as a fantasy adventure without feeling preached to. The land of Narnia itself is presented with majestic beauty. Its endless winter landscapes, detailed costumes, and richly designed sets create a world that feels both magical and tangible. The performances across the board are strong, especially from the young cast, with the actress playing Lucy bringing warmth, humor, and sincerity to the role. Once the film draws you in, it's difficult to look away. That said, the final act leans heavily into large-scale battle spectacle, occasionally bordering on excess. Some younger viewers may find the realism of the effects unsettling, even without explicit violence. Overall, the film succeeds as an enchanting fantasy experience. Its craftsmanship, visual ambition, and emotional core combine to create a story that captures the imagination and leaves a lasting impression, proving that classic tales can still feel powerful when reimagined with care. Tilda Swinton delivers an unforgettable performance as the White Witch, appearing almost spectral in her icy white costumes and portraying the character with chilling cruelty and absolutely no hint of compassion. Her presence alone commands the screen. Among the young cast, William mostly stands out as Peter, the eldest sibling, whose journey toward leadership and responsibility feels earned and convincing. My expectations for this film were extremely high. I adored the Chronicles of Narnia books as a child, and adaptations of beloved stories often struggle to live up to that nostalgia. Thankfully, my fears were mostly unfounded. While the opening moments gave me pause, particularly an awkward and somewhat unnecessary prologue set during the London Blitz, followed by the children's relocation to the countryside, the pacing soon finds its rhythm. Initially, the children themselves come across as a little flat, but that impression doesn't last long. Once Lucy steps into the wardrobe for the first time, the film truly comes alive. Her encounter with Mr. Tumnus immediately establishes the emotional core of the story, and from that point on, it becomes clear that C.S. Lewis's world is being handled with care. Georgie Henley proves to be a delightful surprise as Lucy. At first, I worried her performance might lean too heavily into sweetness, but instead she brings energy, curiosity, and courage, qualities that align perfectly with the character as written. Skandar Keynes is equally strong as Edmund, giving the character depth and emotional complexity. Lucy and Edmund easily feel like the most vivid of the siblings. Susan and Peter are comparatively more restrained, but that mirrors their portrayal in the books, where their arcs are subtler and shorter-lived. Swinton's White Witch is nothing short of magnificent. Even when acting against digital environments or visual effects, she never loses her intensity. Her cold stare and sharp delivery make her genuinely unsettling, which is exactly what the role demands. Liam Neeson's voice work as Aslan is equally impressive, lending warmth, authority, and quiet power to the character. The visual realization of Aslan himself is among the finest special effects of its time, majestic, expressive, and utterly believable. Visually, Narnia feels remarkably faithful to how many readers imagined it. The filmmakers wisely resist the temptation to fix what was never broken. Any additions, such as expanded action moments like the frozen river sequence, are minimal and respectful, enhancing rather than distracting from the narrative. The tone of the film also deserves praise. This is not a sanitized, overly cheerful fantasy. Like the books, the movie embraces darker themes and emotional weight. Moral choices feel meaningful, and there is a constant sense that the children are being pushed into adult responsibilities before they are fully prepared for them. The depiction of Aslan's sacrifice is particularly haunting, unsettling in a way that lingers. The final battle is thrilling and expertly staged. While comparisons to The Lord of the Rings are inevitable, the film holds its own without imitation. Given how fresh those epic films were at the time, that's no small compliment. Fans of the novels should walk away satisfied, and newcomers may finally understand why these stories have endured for generations. Director Andrew Adamson brings genuine heart and clarity to Lewis's world, crafting a family adventure that respects its audience. From a technical standpoint, the large-scale action rivals the best fantasy films of the era, evoking the sense of wonder once pioneered by legendary visual effects artists of classic cinema. The story does not shy away from its symbolic layers. Good versus evil, sacrifice, faith, and doubt are all present, but these themes never overwhelm the narrative. Even initially strange elements, like talking animals and mythical creatures, quickly become emotionally grounded. We care about these characters because their struggles feel real. Georgie Henley emerges as the emotional center of the film, carrying its innocence and hope. Tilda Swinton is terrifying in the best possible way, embodying the White Witch with razor-sharp menace. And Liam Neeson's Aslan is nothing short of iconic. Supporting voice performances, from the Beavers to the Sly Fox, add warmth and personality, rounding out a fantasy world that feels alive. In the end, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe succeeds because it understands what made the book special in the first place. It respects the source material, trusts its audience, and delivers a story filled with wonder, danger, and meaning, exactly as it should. If you want, I can also. The stories behind the Chronicles of Narnia are deeply rooted in mythology and spiritual symbolism, drawing inspiration from Norse legends, Greco-Roman traditions, Persian myths, medieval chivalry, and Judeo-Christian themes. All of these influences come together beautifully in the first cinematic adaptation, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. What immediately stands out is the film's stunning visual presentation and the strong performances by the young cast, making it an excellent choice for family audiences. The seamless blending of live actors with richly animated creatures, particularly the majestic lion Aslan, demonstrates impressive technical craftsmanship. While many viewers recognize the spiritual undertones, the symbolism is handled with subtlety rather than heavy-handed allegory. This reflects C.S. Lewis's original intention, stories meant to delight children first, while allowing deeper meanings to reveal themselves naturally as readers mature. Interestingly, the four siblings, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, were inspired by real children evacuated from London during World War II, some of whom stayed with Lewis himself. That historical context adds emotional weight to the story, and the film stays remarkably loyal to the spirit of the novel. It's easy to imagine that Lewis would have been proud of how faithfully his world was brought to life on screen. Having just seen the film at the cinema, I can confidently say it is an entertaining and engaging experience. The plot follows four siblings sent away from wartime London to live with an eccentric professor in the countryside. During a game of hide-and-seek, Lucy stumbles into a wardrobe that leads to the magical land of Narnia. Initially dismissed as imagination, her discovery is eventually shared by her siblings, who soon realize they've entered a realm where animals speak, and a battle between good and evil is underway. They encounter Aslan, the noble lion who stands at the heart of Narnia's hope. What they don't immediately realize is that betrayal lurks among them, as one child is tempted into siding with the ruthless White Witch, whose goal is absolute control over Narnia and the destruction of Aslan himself. For those concerned that the film's spiritual imagery might overshadow the entertainment, I found that it does quite the opposite. Rather than detracting from the experience, these elements offer adults something meaningful to reflect on afterward, something many blockbuster films fail to achieve. The performances across the board are solid, with the White Witch emerging as a particularly memorable presence. The voice work for the animal characters is impressive, though it is curious that some of the wolves sound distinctly American. Director Andrew Adamson does a commendable job balancing spectacle with storytelling, ensuring the narrative never feels overwhelmed by special effects. The visual work, supported by the same studio responsible for The Lord of the Rings, delivers grand landscapes and believable fantasy creatures, even if a few background shots reveal their artificial origins. In the end, this film feels like essential viewing for fans of epic fantasy. If you're looking for something in the vein of Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings, this film deserves a spot on your list. It stands among the strongest films of its release year. As someone who has read all of Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, though many years ago, I was pleased to find that this adaptation recaptured much of the wonder and emotional pull of the books. The opening act takes its time establishing the children and their personalities, which may feel slow to some viewers, but once Narnia is revealed, the pace and excitement increase significantly. Because the film arrived after other fantasy franchises featuring children, magic, and talking creatures, some scenes may feel familiar to seasoned viewers. However, it's worth remembering that the story itself predates those works. The slightly reserved behavior of the children also makes sense when viewed through the lens of 1940s sensibilities. The young actors perform well overall, with Lucy standing out as the most emotionally engaging. The supporting cast of well-known British actors adds gravitas, including a chilling portrayal of the White Witch, a warm and wise professor guarding the secret of the wardrobe, and a surprisingly playful faun who brings charm and humor to the story. The special effects succeed in bringing Narnia to life, from its snowy forests to its final large-scale battle. While the climactic conflict may not quite reach the epic heights of Peter Jackson's work, it remains thrilling and well executed. The talking animals in particular are convincingly animated, with smooth movement and well-synced dialogue. Overall, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a visually rich, emotionally resonant film that honors its literary roots while standing confidently as a cinematic fantasy in its own right. It still feels a little unfortunate that the Chronicles of Narnia reached the screen after the Harry Potter phenomenon, because the storytelling foundation here is arguably just as rich, if not richer. Even so, this lavish production eventually managed to establish itself strongly enough to produce two follow-up films. One can only hope that all 7 books will one day receive full cinematic treatment. Thankfully, none of the novels are lengthy enough to warrant being stretched into multiple parts. I first encountered The Lion, The Witch, and the Wardrobe as a child, and I remember enjoying it greatly. While I never watched the earlier television adaptations, this film stands as a respectable and thoughtful translation of C.S. Lewis's work. One of its greatest strengths lies in its visual presentation, grand and polished without tipping into excess or absurdity. The fantasy world feels alive and believable rather than overdone. Beyond the visuals, the film carries a light sense of humor and remains consistently entertaining, even if it never reaches extraordinary heights. That said, the pacing does suffer in places, occasionally slowing to a point where the narrative feels flat. The performances are solid, but don't always rise to their full potential. Musically, the score fits the tone well, reinforcing the sense of wonder and myth without overpowering the story. What Narnia does succeed at is standing well above the wave of shallow children's films that dominated cinemas around its release. The end result is a respectable, family-friendly fantasy that appeals across generations. Directed by Andrew Adamson, the film transforms Lewis's symbolic tale into a visually grounded experience. The story follows Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, 4 siblings sent away during World War II, who stumble upon a mysterious wardrobe that opens into the frozen land of Narnia. This world is locked in eternal winter under the rule of the White Witch, and only the return of the lion Aslan can restore balance. The film carries clear Christian symbolism. Aslan represents sacrifice and redemption, the witch embodies corruption and temptation, and the wardrobe itself suggests choice and transformation. Adamson, previously known for his work on the Shrek films, brings this mythic narrative to life with confidence and restraint. Tilda Swinton commands attention as the White Witch, delivering a chilling performance marked by icy elegance and quiet menace. James McAvoy brings warmth and sincerity to Mr. Tumnus, whose kindness toward Lucy places him directly in the witch's path. Skandar Keynes portrays Edmund convincingly as a child led astray by resentment and curiosity, while Georgie Henley's Lucy acts as the emotional anchor of the story, curious, brave, and open-hearted. Liam Neeson's voice work as Aslan adds authority and gravitas, reinforcing the character's symbolic role within the story. Although I hadn't read the book nor seen the 1988 television adaptation prior to watching the film, a personal failing, admittedly, I found myself moderately impressed. The special effects, while not overwhelming in number, are subtle and effective. The animals, often a weak point in fantasy films, look natural and convincing, thanks to careful digital work and restrained visual enhancement. Narratively, the film remains very much a children's story. It doesn't dwell on explanations, and many plot developments rely on coincidence or fortunate timing. The goal is less about tension and more about moral growth. The children are thrust into roles of responsibility, learning lessons about loyalty, courage, and family along the way. While the story contains inconsistencies and moments that break immersion, this is largely dependent on how forgiving the viewer is willing to be. Performance-wise, Swinton once again carries much of the dramatic weight. Without her presence, the film would lose much of its intensity. The child actors are competent, though some may find certain character traits, particularly the older sister's hesitancy, grating. Supporting roles, whether human or animal, largely serve the story without drawing much focus. Ultimately, this is a cinematic adaptation of a children's book deeply rooted in Christian allegory. Its primary audience is young viewers, particularly those familiar with its themes. Still, even adults can find enjoyment in its sweeping music, gentle moral lessons, and imaginative world, provided they approach it as a simple, symbolic fairy tale rather than a complex fantasy epic. As a child, I was never especially fond of the Chronicles of Narnia novels. Their moral earnestness often felt heavy-handed, and I was always suspicious of stories that seemed designed to instruct rather than entertain. Those suspicions were reinforced when a classmate, already aspiring to a future in the church, explained that the series functioned as a prolonged Christian allegory. Even then, the word allegory somehow felt unavoidably appropriate. I never felt any strong urge to return to the Chronicles of Narnia in adulthood, which is why I was genuinely taken aback by how much I enjoyed the film adaptation of The Lion, The Witch, and the Wardrobe. What I expected to feel dated or overly sentimental instead turned out to be engaging, atmospheric, and surprisingly effective. The film begins in wartime London during the Second World War. As German air raids intensify, four siblings, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy Pevensey, are sent away from the city for safety. They are relocated to a vast countryside estate owned by an unusual and slightly eccentric professor. While exploring the house and playing games to pass the time, the children stumble upon an old wardrobe that unexpectedly serves as a passageway into another world, the magical land of Narnia. Once inside this strange realm, they are drawn into a growing conflict between two powerful forces. On one side stands Aslan, the majestic lion who represents hope and renewal. On the other is Jadis, the White Witch, a cold and merciless ruler who has cast Narnia into an endless frozen state, an unnatural winter where joy and celebration never arrive. Although the term White Witch usually suggests benevolence, in Jadis's case it reflects her icy appearance, her obsession with the color white, and the frozen tyranny she enforces rather than any moral purity. From memory, the film stays largely faithful to C.S. Lewis's original storyline, and with that fidelity comes the presence of unmistakable religious symbolism. Aslan clearly echoes the figure of Christ, while the White Witch embodies temptation and corruption. Elements of the narrative mirror biblical themes, such as the fall from innocence, sacrifice, death, and rebirth. However, these ideas are handled subtly enough that the film never feels like a theological lesson. Instead, it works comfortably as a family-friendly fantasy adventure that viewers can enjoy without engaging with its deeper allegorical meanings. Given Lewis's close friendship with J.R.R. Tolkien, it seems fitting that the film shares some visual and tonal similarities with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, particularly during its large-scale battle scenes. Like Tolkien's world, Narnia comes alive through sweeping landscapes and epic confrontations, many of which were filmed in New Zealand. That said, Narnia maintains a lighter, more accessible tone and never reaches the same level of gravity as Peter Jackson's Middle-earth saga. Among the cast, the most striking performance comes from Tilda Swinton as the White Witch. Her portrayal is both chilling and captivating, combining elegance with genuine menace. Aslan, voiced by Liam Neeson, feels more symbolic than emotionally complex, noble, powerful, and steadfast, but somewhat limited in depth. This simplicity seems rooted more in Lewis's original depiction than in the performance itself. The film's fantasy world is populated by an eclectic mix of mythological creatures, fauns, centaurs, minotaurs, griffins, dwarfs, and a variety of talking animals, all brought to life through impressive CGI. Lewis drew inspiration from multiple mythological traditions, particularly Greek mythology, and the visual effects team succeeds in making this diverse cast feel tangible and alive. What struck me far more as an adult than it ever did in childhood is just how surreal Narnia truly is. The film highlights this wonderfully in its early sequences. A snow-blanketed forest interrupted by a solitary Victorian lamppost, overly polite fauns offering tea, and beavers speaking in unmistakably working-class British accents while enjoying fish and chips. It's an odd, whimsical world, and that strange charm is part of its appeal. One can't help but wonder if Lewis, despite his conservative academic image, had a streak of imaginative surrealism closer to artists like Salvador Dali than he might have openly admitted. Although the Chronicles of Narnia is often labeled as children's literature, it is deeply shaped by Lewis's experiences of war and loss. Having lived through the Great Wars, Lewis understood the emotional toll that conflict, especially separation, placed on children. Director Andrew Adamson honors this aspect of the story by opening the film with tense, unsettling scenes of the London Blitz, capturing the fear and chaos that forced families apart. The Pevensey children, Lucy, Georgie Henley, Edmund Skandar Keynes, Peter William Moseley, and Susan Anna Popplewell, are sent to the countryside mansion owned by the professor, portrayed with warmth and quiet authority by Jim Broadbent. Lucy is the first to discover Narnia through the wardrobe, and before long, all four siblings are drawn into its mysteries, encountering allies and enemies alike as the larger conflict unfolds. The child actors deliver strong performances, with Georgie Henley standing out in particular for her sincerity and emotional range. While I personally found that the story loses a bit of its emotional grounding once the CGI creatures take center stage, a purely subjective reaction, the technical execution remains impressive. Overall, the combination of compelling performances, thoughtful direction, and imaginative world building results in a film that feels both magical and emotionally resonant. In the end, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe succeeds as more than just a nostalgic adaptation. It captures the wonder, fear, and hope at the heart of Lewis's story, offering an enchanting cinematic experience that resonates well beyond childhood. This movie is adapted from one of the 7 fantasy novels by C.S. Lewis set in the mythical land of Narnia. My earliest memory of the tale comes from an animated version, where four siblings stumble upon a wardrobe that serves as a gateway to a frozen, medieval-style fantasy realm ruled by a cruel witch. Interestingly, the opening moments of the film are so steeped in wartime imagery that one could briefly mistake it for a WWII drama, complete with intense scenes of the German air raids over London. With their father away fighting in the war, Mrs. Pevensey decides it's safest to send her four children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, out of the city and into the countryside. They are placed in the care of the eccentric Professor Kirk, whose presence feels surprisingly underused. It is the youngest child, Lucy, who first uncovers the secret of the wardrobe hidden inside the large old house. The siblings squabble frequently, but their journey into Narnia slowly teaches them the value of unity, trust, and family bonds. Initially, Lucy's claims about the wardrobe are dismissed, but before long the others follow her into the magical world. That said, the film takes its time getting there. Nearly an hour passes before Narnia truly opens up, testing the patience of some viewers. Cursed in eternal winter, Narnia awaits the fulfillment of a prophecy involving two sons of Adam and two daughters of Eve, destined to free the land from the grip of the White Witch. Before they can face this fate, the children must learn how to use the enchanted gifts they receive from Father Christmas and seek guidance from Aslan, the noble, speaking lion. While Aslan's presence is commanding and dignified, the mentor role feels familiar, perhaps even repetitive for seasoned moviegoers. Much was made of the talking animals prior to release, but that criticism feels unnecessary. Lions, beavers, wolves, foxes, and countless other creatures converse fluently, their animated expressions and perfectly synced dialogue clearly designed to appeal to younger audiences, and no doubt to fuel a wave of merchandise. Visually, the film is polished and often beautiful. However, familiarity with the original story robs the narrative of surprise. The plot unfolds predictably, with few moments that truly build momentum or emotional payoff. The director opts for a cautious, almost overly safe approach, resulting in a story that feels flat despite its epic setting. Ironically, the animated animals deliver more convincing performances than the human cast. The four Pevensey children struggle with stiff, forced acting, making their scenes difficult to fully invest in. In contrast, the digitally created creatures display far more emotional range. The White Witch looks convincingly menacing, though her portrayal lacks depth beyond surface-level villainy. The most talked-about sequence, the large-scale battle, delivers spectacle but little intensity. Compared to other fantasy epics, it fails to raise the stakes or offer anything truly memorable. With so many creatures on the battlefield, it becomes more of a visual checklist than an emotionally engaging conflict. As for the claims that this film functions as a religious allegory aimed at children, such interpretations feel exaggerated. While certain themes may echo familiar symbolic ideas, they are presented in a restrained, family-friendly way. There is no graphic imagery or heavy-handed messaging, just a simple moral framework suitable for a young audience. Will the film succeed financially? Almost certainly. Its status as a major event release ensures strong interest. However, while it delivers on spectacle and nostalgia, it falls short of offering anything truly groundbreaking. Mediocre performances and a cautious narrative hold it back. Should future installments be made, one can only hope they improve upon this foundation and take greater creative risks. The film features a strong ensemble cast led by Georgie Henley as Lucy, Skandar Keynes as Edmund, William Moseley as Peter, Anna Popplewell as Susan, and Tilda Swinton as the White Witch. Supporting them are memorable voice performances from James McAvoy as Mr. Tumnus, Liam Neeson as Aslan, and Ray Winstone as Mr. Beaver. The film was widely recognized for its visual artistry, earning the Academy Award for Best Character Design in 2006. I've always believed that the best way to tell a story is to begin at its true starting point. That's something this movie doesn't quite do. Despite its popularity, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is not actually the first story in the Narnia timeline. Chronologically, the world of Narnia begins earlier, in The Magician's Nephew. Of course, cinema has successfully handled prequels before, Star Wars being a famous example, but what feels unusual here is how much of Narnia's history is left unexplained. As the film progresses, we discover Narnia alongside the four children, but we're also left with very little understanding of how the White Witch rose to power or what shaped this frozen world before their arrival. Mystery can be effective in fantasy storytelling, but only when handled with precision. In this case, the screenplay doesn't fully capitalize on that ambiguity, leaving certain elements underdeveloped. It also feels like C.S. Lewis's source material could have been explored with greater confidence. The filmmakers appear cautious, perhaps worried about leaning too heavily into the book's religious symbolism. While the story is undeniably rich in Christian allegory, avoiding it altogether seems to weaken the thematic depth rather than strengthen it. That said, the film still succeeds in capturing a sense of wonder. It works because it appeals to the childlike imagination we all carry with us. The visual effects are impressive, the character designs are excellent, and the costumes and environments feel as though they've been pulled directly from a storybook. Unlike The Lord of the Rings, which is a grand war epic, Narnia embraces its identity as a fairy tale, lighter, more whimsical, and aimed at a younger audience. Because of this, it's a film that remains rewatchable, even if devoted readers of Lewis's books might find aspects to critique. I first read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in 6th grade, and it quickly became a book I returned to again and again. When the film adaptation was announced, I was nervous. Like many readers, I worried it wouldn't live up to the version I had built in my imagination. Eventually, I realized that comparing a film directly to a book often leads to disappointment. Some changes are inevitable, either for pacing, visual storytelling, or sheer practicality. When I finally gave the movie a fair chance, I was pleasantly surprised. Set during World War II, the story follows 4 siblings, Lucy, Edmund, Peter, and Susan, who are sent away from London for safety. While exploring their temporary home, Lucy stumbles into a wardrobe that leads to the magical land of Narnia. There she meets Mr. Tumnus, a faun who warns her of the White Witch's rule. Eventually, all 4 children enter Narnia, but Edmund is tempted by the witch and betrays his siblings. What follows is a journey of redemption, courage, and unity, as the children learn they are destined to become Narnia's future rulers and restore peace to the land. In many ways, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe serves as a fantasy epic tailored for younger audiences, something accessible in a way The Lord of the Rings never intended to be. While I still hold the book closest to my heart, the performances, visual effects, and overall tone make the film genuinely enjoyable. It's a warm, family-friendly experience that still holds up. That said, I didn't leave the film completely satisfied. While I adored the book as a child, some elements simply don't translate well to the screen. Lewis's religious symbolism, in particular, feels awkward in cinematic form. Although director Andrew Adamson deserves credit for ambition and scale, the latter half of the movie feels overly bright. Some of the animation lacks polish, Aslan being the clear exception, and the final battle leans toward the unintentionally goofy. Ultimately, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a visually charming and emotionally sincere adaptation, even if it struggles to fully capture the depth of its source material. It may not be perfect, but it remains a memorable fantasy that continues to enchant new generations. The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The film features a strong ensemble cast led by Georgie Henley as Lucy, Skandar Keynes as Edmund, William Moseley as Peter, Anna Popplewell as Susan, and Tilda Swinton as the White Witch. The voice cast is equally impressive, with James McAvoy, Liam Neeson, and Ray Winstone bringing key characters to life. The film was also recognized at the Academy Awards, winning the Oscar for Best Makeup in 2006. I've always believed that if you want to tell a story properly, you should begin at its true starting point. Interestingly, this film doesn't do that. Despite its popularity, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe isn't actually where the Chronicles of Narnia timeline begins. That honor belongs to the magician's nephew. Of course, cinema audiences are no strangers to prequels. Star Wars proved that approach can work, but what's unusual here is how little context the film provides about the world it introduces. As viewers, we're dropped into Narnia, knowing almost as little as the 4 main children themselves. While that sense of mystery might sound appealing, it raises questions the film never fully answers. How did the White Witch gain control? What was Narnia like before her reign? These gaps might have added depth if handled carefully, but the script doesn't quite have the finesse needed to make that ambiguity feel purposeful. It also feels like the creative team hesitated to fully explore the deeper layers of C.S. Lewis's novel. Perhaps there was concern about leaning too heavily into the book's Christian symbolism, which is undeniably present, even if subtly presented on screen. As a result, some of the story's emotional and thematic richness feels slightly restrained. That said, the film still succeeds in what matters most, capturing a sense of wonder. It taps into the childlike imagination we all carry, reminding us of the fantasy worlds we once dreamed of. Visually, the movie shines. The special effects and creature designs are impressive, the costumes are beautifully crafted, and the snowy landscapes of Narnia feel straight out of a classic fairy tale. This is where the film stands apart from something like The Lord of the Rings. While Tolkien's saga is a sweeping war epic, Narnia embraces its identity as a fairy tale, gentler, more whimsical, and designed to spark imagination rather than overwhelm with scale. For that reason alone, it's a movie worth revisiting, even if devoted readers of Lewis's books may have mixed feelings. Personally, I first read The Lion, The Witch, and the Wardrobe in 6th grade, and it quickly became a book I could read again and again. When I initially saw the trailer for the film, I was nervous. I wasn't sure any adaptation could live up to what I had imagined while reading. Eventually, I realized that comparing a film too closely to its source material often leads to disappointment. Books and movies are different mediums, and some changes are inevitable, sometimes even necessary. When I finally gave the film a chance, I was pleasantly surprised. Set during World War II, the story follows siblings Lucy, Edmund, Peter, and Susan, who are sent away from London for safety. While exploring their temporary home, Lucy stumbles upon a wardrobe that leads to the magical land of Narnia. There she meets Mr. Tumnus, a faun who warns her of the dangers posed by the White Witch. As her siblings eventually follow her into this new world, Edmund is tempted by the witch and betrays them, forcing the family to confront both external evil and internal conflict. Together, they must restore peace to Narnia and fulfill their destiny as its future rulers. In many ways, this film feels like a gateway epic for younger audiences, an accessible fantasy that invites kids into a genre that might otherwise feel intimidating. While I still prefer the book for its depth and imagination, the performances, visual effects, and overall presentation make the film genuinely enjoyable. It's a warm, engaging family movie that's easy to recommend. That said, not everything worked for me. Leaving the theater, I felt oddly disconnected. Despite the film's loyalty to the plot, some elements simply didn't translate well from page to screen. The symbolic themes that resonate so strongly in Lewis's writing lose some impact in live-action form. Director Andrew Adamson deserves credit for his ambition, but the film's second half feels overly bright. Some of the animation is uneven, Aslan being a notable exception, and the climactic battle borders on unintentionally silly. In the end, The Lion, The Witch, and the Wardrobe is a visually enchanting and heartfelt adaptation that may not fully capture the soul of the book, but still offers a memorable journey into a beloved fantasy world. Trying to compress a richly detailed novel into a 2-hour runtime is never easy, and that challenge is clearly felt here. While the film manages to preserve the heart and spirit of the original story, the overall experience feels rushed and uneven. Events move forward at such a rapid pace that there's barely time to absorb character motivations or emotional shifts. As a result, many of the characters come across as underdeveloped, and several important moments lack the weight they deserve. One example that stands out is Edmund's first encounter with the White Witch. Imagine being a child who accidentally discovers a hidden world inside a wardrobe, only to be promised a throne by a powerful queen. That revelation alone should be overwhelming. Yet when Edmund returns to the real world, his reaction is strangely muted. The film barely explores his internal conflict, offering only a brief and awkward scene where Peter notes that Edmund seems moody. It feels like a missed opportunity to build tension and depth. The pacing also hurts the story's progression. The children shift from hesitation to full-scale participation in a war almost instantly. One moment they're unsure and frightened, and the next they're fully armored and charging into battle. In a novel, these emotional transitions are easier to justify because readers live inside the characters' thoughts. On screen, however, the lack of build-up makes their decisions feel abrupt and at times unearned. It becomes difficult to fully invest in their choice to fight for Narnia. There are also some performance quirks that may distract certain viewers. Lucy, portrayed by a very young Georgie Henley, often appears to be smiling, sometimes in moments where the tone calls for vulnerability or fear. At times, that expression comes across as oddly mischievous rather than innocent, which can feel unintentionally unsettling. Even during emotional scenes, her expressions don't always match the gravity of the moment. Am I being overly critical? Perhaps a little. My reaction likely stems from a deep affection for the book itself. As someone who connected strongly with the story years ago, I found the adaptation somewhat underwhelming. I felt detached from the characters, thought some of the visual effects were unimpressive, and found the final battle surprisingly anticlimactic. That said, fans of the books may still find plenty to enjoy. Personally, I walked away disappointed, though judging by its strong IMDb rating, I seem to be in the minority. Interestingly, despite these criticisms, the film also has undeniable strengths. It offers a solid mix of action, drama, mystery, and a lingering sense of danger. Visually, it's often striking, with a rich and colorful aesthetic that brings the fantasy world to life. Younger viewers will likely be drawn in by the magic, the sense of adventure, and the larger-than-life creatures that populate Narnia. and while it's often labeled as a children's movie, there's enough substance here for adults to appreciate as well. Tilda Swinton's performance as the White Witch is one of the film's highlights. She is captivating and chilling, blending cruelty, sarcasm, and cold authority with a strangely alluring presence. Her portrayal gives the villain real weight and makes her genuinely intimidating, especially for younger characters and viewers alike. As the first cinematic adaptation of C.S. Lewis's beloved series, the film remains fairly faithful to its source material. However, parents should be aware that some scenes may be intense for very young children. The battle sequences are large-scale and aggressive, the White Witch can be frightening, and the story contains themes that skew more mature than expected. For me, the film lands somewhere in the middle. It has moments of brilliance and flashes of wonder, but it never fully comes together as a cohesive whole. Some characters don't quite work, the music is unremarkable, and the film feels longer than it needs to be. The heavy seriousness doesn't always suit the story, making the lighter moments, particularly those involving Mr. Beaver, feel like a welcome relief. Ultimately, this first installment is something of an oddity. It's a rare case where the opening chapter feels weaker than what follows. Set during the London Blitz, the story of four siblings escaping war only to stumble into another conflict is compelling in concept. Their discovery of Narnia, a frozen land ruled by a tyrant and haunted by prophecy, sets the stage for an epic struggle between good and evil. While the film doesn't completely satisfy me as an adaptation, I can still see why it resonates with so many viewers. It may not live up to the full potential of the book, but for many, it remains a magical and memorable journey. Adapted from C.S. Lewis's beloved novel, The Chronicles of Narnia. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe starts on a strong note. The early portion of the film, where the youngest sibling stumbles upon a mysterious world hidden inside an ordinary wardrobe, captures a genuine sense of wonder. Her struggle to convince the others that Narnia is real gives the story a charming and engaging foundation. Unfortunately, once all four children are fully immersed in the larger conflict of Narnia, the film begins to lose its individuality. It increasingly resembles a diluted fantasy epic, echoing the Lord of the Rings, but without the same intensity, depth, or memorable characters. One of the most disappointing elements is Aslan himself. Intended to be the emotional and moral center of the story, the character often comes across as overly sentimental and filled with generic wisdom rather than genuine gravitas. Even during his climactic sacrifice, a moment meant to be deeply moving, the emotional impact feels strangely muted. This is partly due to how overt and heavy the religious symbolism becomes. Rather than functioning as subtle allegory, the parallels are presented so plainly that they risk feeling more like imitation than inspiration. There are also moments that raise questions about the film's tone and target audience, most notably a scene where Santa Claus distributes weapons to very young children. In a movie clearly marketed toward families, this imagery feels awkward and poorly thought out. Visually, the film is often stunning. The landscapes, costumes, and overall production design are richly imagined and beautiful to look at. That said, some of the special effects shots are surprisingly uneven, occasionally appearing less polished than expected for a production of this scale. Performances from the child actors are serviceable overall. Georgie Henley, as the youngest sibling, stands out with a natural warmth and expressiveness, especially in her scenes with James McAvoy's Mr.